So thanks, of course, for coming to another workflow community meeting update. I realize with the 2.13 release, that means we've been doing production releases for over a year now. So that's kind of awesome. So congratulations to everybody. The agenda today is pretty straightforward. Got a couple announcements. I'll go over what's in the workflow release that went out yesterday. Chris Nova is going to talk about and hopefully demo the Native Ingress feature that's in there. And I'll talk real quick about future directions for workflow, and then we'll open up to questions. And if you have a question, if you want to interrupt, please feel free, because obviously we're a small group, and if don't let something slip your mind, so feel free to interrupt, but I'll get going. One announcement, we're kind of upgrading our Jenkins install right now. So it's looking likely that ci.deis.io, where all of the PRs get tested and everything, could be down today, maybe even tomorrow. Probably not. We'll probably get it back up real soon. But if you submit a PR or checking on the status of PR and you're seeing errors or it failed to run, that's why we're on top of it. And as soon as we get the new Jenkins up, we'll go ahead and rerun any backlog that's accumulated. So yesterday, with everybody's help, we got workflow 2.13 released. The changelog is here. I'll post the link to the changelog. But in brief, here are some of the things we added. You can now, since Kubernetes removed this limitation, if you're on a recent version of Kubernetes, you can have long, oh boy, here's the cat. You can have really long app names up to 63 characters, whereas before it was pretty limited. Hi, buddy. We added a flag to FluentD to stop shipping Deis-specific logs and metrics, because there's a fair amount of traffic there, and some people actually didn't care about that. The config list command now has this really nice diff flag, so you can actually see what the difference between your set of config variables is and the next ones you're setting. You could set default config tags for an entire Deis installation, so every time you deploy an app, the app will end up essentially with a node selector attached to it that ensures that, for example, it always gets deployed on an SSD node or something like that. Very useful. Similarly, Builder also has a node selector feature now, so that when you're actually pushing an app, we spawn those temporary containers, the Docker Builder, the Slug Builder. Those guys can take a fair amount of resources, so now you can say only run those jobs essentially on specific nodes. We got the container, we got the unit tests and the style tests for controller containerized, so you don't need to install Python 3 and a whole bunch of hoo-ha on your local drive. We were running into a problem previously that probably everybody here knows about, where Builder was just panicking in some cases. Turns out it really boils down to the fact that Go Crypto doesn't support DSA keys and isn't going to, so we removed support for that. I don't think that's going to bite anybody, because probably you weren't using that for your actual Git push off, but if you were, you will run into that. We updated Docker registry code, Nginx, and put a ton of bug fixes in there, as usual. Any questions on this current release? Okay, the next thing we're going to do is, as I mentioned, we have an experimental feature in there for Native Ingress, so you stop using the good old Deis router and actually use Kubernetes Native Ingress. Chris is going to talk about that and give us a demo. Take it away, Chris.
Hi, everyone. Hold on. I'm going to share my screen. Cool. You guys can all see this, right?
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, so I'll start off in the documentation, and then I'm going to jump over into a wiki script that I kind of wrote, and we're actually going to go through the process of deploying workflow with this flag set to true, and we're going to actually go through the exercise of getting a Kubernetes Ingress controller up and running. but I did want to point out a few things in the docs just to get started. If you go to the installing workflow documentation, there's now sort of a clean exit point here that will point the user over to the experimental native ingress installation path. It's real similar to the traditional way of installing workflow. The only real difference is now we're going to be using Helm's --set flag to flip a few values at runtime, which of course you're also welcome to manipulate the chart as well. So to start off, if you were going to do this today, the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure you grab the latest chart. You can do that by typing Helm repo up, and that will update all of your local Helm cache index.yaml files. So after you have that done, you can actually do a Helm install of Deis workflow. And what we're going to do here is we're going to put it in the namespace Deis, and we're going to flip the flag global experimental native ingress equal to true, and the controller.platform domain equal to a dummy domain that I use. So where am I at? So I will paste in these arguments here. So I already have a Kubernetes cluster up and running in GKE. So I'm able to use kubectl to talk to it, and you could just do a Helm install. And I already did a Helm init, so it's ready to go. Any questions so far? We're waiting for, oh, there we go. Just kidding. So one of the things I wanted to point out is if you actually look in here, you're not going to see the Deis router anywhere. So what essentially happened behind the scenes is Helm performed some logic for us, and based on the fact that that flag was now set to true, it defaults to false. We actually are changing the installation path of workflow a little bit. So once that is done, we can actually verify that everything is running in a pod as expected. Again, noticing that router is, of course, not in here. We could grep for it. We wouldn't get any results. So the one thing I wanted to point out is we now have installed an ingress rule, which defaults to deis.whatever your host name is set to. And that rule is there, but it doesn't do anything because we don't have a controller in place to actually route traffic for us. So in this example, we're going to be using traffic, which is just a well-known ingress controller that will just serve as a basic traffic router for this demo. So we can install that. I pulled this right out of the documentation for the chart out of the GitHub repository. And now that ingress controller is up and running, we can pull some output out and actually wait and see. This thing will eventually get an external IP address. And I guess now is a good time for me to mention that DNS is going to be a breaking point for some users. Traditionally, to install workflow, you don't have to have a DNS hostname set. And now, because of the way that Ingress works, you do actually need a hostname defined before you're able to actually install this. So in my original installation command, I not only flipped the flag from false to true, but I also defined a hostname. So while we're waiting for this to get an external IP address, usually it doesn't change, but every once in a while it will change. I've done this a few times on this cluster. So it's just kind of if GK is going to be nice to me or not. If it doesn't change, I shouldn't have to change my DNS records at all. If it does change, all I have to do is update an A record. I use Route 53, but whatever your DNS provider is. And I just do a wildcard dot my hostname, whatever I defined in that original installation command. So that looks like off the cuff. I'm just going to check to be sure. The public IP address that we're using. And I'm doing the split window, so bear with me. So it looks like it did change. So we'll update that. And we will ensure that it's going to work on our end. So all this is going to do is just point my local DNS resolution to whatever it looks up for the hosted zone in AWS. And we'll go back to our doc. So now we have workflow deployed, we have no router, and we have the ingress rule in place, and we also have an ingress controller in place. So now everything should work as expected. We should be able to do a Deis register, http:// again, because this is wildcard, I could put anything here, but workflow expects it to be Deis dot. It's a convention within workflow. So put that in, and poof, there you go. So instead of registering, I can show that we, again, don't have the router running, but we do have, did I type get twice? I did. A service running as an ingress controller. Okay, great. So we can go ahead and deploy an app. I wanted to just point this out really quick because I just want to demonstrate that there's not going to be any breaking changes here. So, oh, I need to log in. And we can deploy a quick app. And this is actually going to create a new ingress rule for us as well for the application so that the ingress controller will route traffic to it, of course. So while we're waiting on that, I'll go ahead and curl this thing in the background to demonstrate that it works. But does anybody have any questions on the feature or any feedback at all?
This is pretty fabulous.
See what you did there. Cool, powered by Deis. So that worked. So the wildcard DNS setting was really handy here so that we were able to resolve an application. Any other feedback?
There's a question in chat about differences between the Ingress controller and the native router that currently is in Deis workflow.
I can't speak super highly on the router. I haven't worked with it that closely. Anybody else have any ideas?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit on the differences between like the Deis router that's currently in there and experimental native Ingress and the Ingress controller. The Ingress controller, the one that is being built by the Kubernetes community as a whole, they currently have integration or more tight integrations with, say, Kubernetes native plugins or something that people are building. For example, kubelego is one project that people are building on top of, which, as you set annotations on your Ingress routes or Ingress rules on the actual application itself, if you use kubelego with your Ingress controller, kubelego will actually go to Let's Encrypt and automatically generate an SSL or TLS certificate for the Ingress route and the Ingress rule. So there's advantages to that. We can't necessarily get like the Deis router working as an Ingress controller just due to backwards compatibility with what our annotations are. So this allows us to kind of see what's the best way forward for like the routing stuff. In terms of like feature set differences on them, the feature set difference is that like the Deis router itself has different ways of how you would handle SSL certificates for your applications and terminal. And then there's also things like client max body size and those kind of tunable config that's in the router today. It's just more of what is the community moving forward with. And it seems like Ingress is the right way forward. So this is experimental.
And one other little detail, just before I forget, since Ingress doesn't support raw TCP at this point, if you make this change, then what we had to do is fire up a load balancer separately for Builder so you could still get to Builder. Not a big deal, but you probably want to know if you're installing this.
Cool. Well, I will hand it back over to you, Boisma.
Cool. Thanks very much. Yeah, and obviously we're really hoping people are able to take this for a test drive and let us know if it fits into their existing Kubernetes setup. That was really the goal, because right now, for a lot of people with hardened or existing Kubernetes clusters, Deis router doesn't fit very well in there. So if you need this, you probably are excited about it already, and we'd love to get your feedback and make it better as soon as possible. Yeah, that's about it. So for the next release, we're still doing monthly releases. The next one's on May 4th. It's going to include, refinements, some more tests and stuff to this ingress feature, and hopefully changes based on your feedback. The other thing we're going to be starting up very soon is an integration with the Kubernetes service broker world. Ideally something like a new Deis command that acts like Heroku add-ons or something like that. That activity will get going pretty soon. That's about it. Is there anything I forgot anyone else can think of, or do we have any more questions? Cool. Thank you very much. We'll post this on YouTube as we always do, and the next community meeting is exactly a month from today. So thanks, everybody.